Mm-hmm. Okay. Good evening and welcome to the Bat of Minerva. Peter Shea, host for the show, mercifully behind the camera as usual. Tonight, visiting with my neighbor. I haven't done anything in the neighborhood in a long time. Don Kemp, who had the dubious honor of finishing his Doctor of Divinity degree within a few weeks of me finishing my PhD, which is sort of how we got talking. And I discovered that Don had had about 3 major careers in his life and possibly wasn't through with it yet. We trade teaching stories, Don being a teacher at North High in math and me being an intermittent teacher in philosophy wherever they'll pay me. So we kind of trade teaching stories, but it occurred to me that we really have to get some of this, anybody who travels intellectually as much as Don has stories to tell, and I want to hear them. Thank you for being my guest tonight. I really appreciate it. Can you tell us a little bit about the long and windy journey of your life?
The long and windy journey starts out as a country boy in Michigan, where I find myself doing a lot of farm work. Good old country farm work ethic. Get up before the sun rises, pick out in the fields, go to school, small town, Boy Scouts, band, all of the things that draw a community together. Great ethics as far as family is concerned, as far as character is concerned, but for a teenager, not very exciting. So as a young teen, I went to Chicago from Michigan and went to high school. And so my last 3 years in high school I spent in Chicago. And during that time I finished school. I went back to college in Western Michigan, went into the service, came back and finished college again, started my career up here in Minnesota, being shipped here as a young engineering grad when they were looking for young talent here in Minnesota. And I've been here for the last 30 years. About 20 years ago, however, the electronic industry kind of diminished. Many of the major companies moved out of Minnesota. The company I was working for left Minneapolis, and I decided I did not want to go because my family was here, my kids were here, and because of that I changed careers and went into the real estate for 4 or 5 years, in which time my wife decided I was sitting at home too much, found me a teaching career without me filling out any papers or doing interviews. She got me hired, and it started consuming so much of my time that for about the last 20 years, that's been what I'm doing most of the time. Teaching in that process was a career, but my passion was ministry, and during that 30 years of both engineering and teaching, my background rumblings was in ministry. And after being in ministry for that long, you tend to collect and acquire a few experiences, and in that time, that's when I went to school, finished all my schooling, and picked up a lot of experience in the church.
Mm-hmm. Quite a life. Well, it's taken a step at a time. That you start out on a farm. I relate to that. I grew up on a little vegetable farm. They got equipment the year after I left.
Right.
Before that, it was a hoe, and it wasn't even, it was a hoe with a broken handle.
Yeah, that's right. And it's hard work.
Yeah.
And for out in the fields, in the barns where it's 110 degrees, throwing hay around where it's hot and sweaty, and you know, it's tough work, and not something that kids nowadays really want to do.
Yeah.
And so I was probably one of the last of a generation. They hire a lot of that stuff out now.
Right. Right. Well, I'm surprised your folks let you go off to school. I expect you may have been so uneasy they didn't have a choice.
Well,
but,
yeah, that was. I was bribed.
Uh-huh.
I was bribed. I was not the best student when I was in elementary school. Probably one of the wilder students, and so they told me if I could get an A average in school that they would let me go, and I don't think they ever thought I could do it, and so it was by accident that I got to go.
I see. So what was it like to transition from farm life to Chicago?
Great for a teenager. I mean, you go from the streets closing up at 5 o'clock to tons of options being available to you. And I went to an all-boys school, same school that my father had gone to in Chicago, and it was very rigorous in its academics. And after school, with extra time, I actually worked at McDonald's.
Gee. And what channeled you towards engineering? I mean, is that just a natural thing to do? Or?
It was a family trade.
Uh-huh.
My grandfather was the first minority to have a TV repair shop in Chicago. He started off as a helper in a pawn shop, fixing radios and TVs to get them back operating, and the fixing of the radios turned out to be such a business that he started his own business. So from that, TV was the family business, and they moved the TV business to Michigan. And so as a 3- and 4-year-old, I was placing tubes in testers and going out with family, visiting different homes and on service trips, and so it was almost an automatic that I went into engineering. It was never even discussed.
Now, since you opened the question of family traditions, and electronics is kind of an unusual one, were there any other things that came through the family to you real strong?
I think one of the other things that came through for me is that my father had died when I was 5. And because of that, a lot of the family was involved in my life. You know, like when I went to Chicago, I was living with family. When I was working, I was doing with family. When a lot of the vacations and so forth I took with other parts of the family. So it was a very, very, very tight family that raised me. So the family ethic was very, very strong.
Gee, you also mentioned being sort of a family with the first minority to do electronic repair in Chicago. Was the minority stuff a big deal for you growing up? I mean, did you feel yourself as a minority in a white culture, or how was that?
I think that was part of the attraction from moving from the country to the city.
Uh-huh.
And it became a lifelong quest as an adult, because that family connection, the mentoring, the giving, and so forth, became something that, as an adult, that I was raised with. And so that's the part that drew me to all the community work, all the service work, all the church work, all the school work, all the teaching, drove me into service, basically into the service sector versus the engineering.
Uh-huh. Gee. Now, another long thread in your life has been this ministry stuff. Can you
Right.
talk about the origins of that, or the early parts of that? I mean,
Well,
how did that idea start?
Look, one of the in Michigan, as a young person, I was raised as a Catholic, and that wasn't automatic, because what happens is you go to church, you go to as an altar boy, you go to church before school starts. The morning service, you go for the hour before school. You do your altar boy service in the church. So it was an automatic kind of thing that was actually going on. So it was transparent to me, because it was like something that you did, that you almost did invisibly. It wasn't something that was good, wasn't something that was bad, it wasn't something that you committed to. It was, hey, you're in the church, this is one of the things that are open to you, and you perform that. The only time that I ever got a challenge on it was in case I happened to miss one of the early morning services. As Catholics in a small town, everybody knew that you missed the morning service. So transparently, my my cardinal sin would be carried from the church to the school environment, and the first thing I walked into class was the teacher asking me, "Where were you this morning?" So in a small time environment, all of that works so closely together that it's sort of invisible. I think my transition from Catholic to Baptist was because of my wife. She was Baptist, and actually I went to her church because I had not been to church the 3 years that I was in the service. So I was in Vietnam, and the wildlife. I had been to church, and I happened to go. And one of the themes in my theology is providence, and the providential aspect of my church transition was the fact that my transition to the Baptist church was because all of the pretty girls in the choir. And with all of the wrong reasons that I had in that process, it turned out to be a 30-year career that that was non-intended.
Let's see. The pretty girls in the choir.
Pretty girls in the choir.
Well, coming from the Catholic side, I guess we've got to do something about our choirs. They're not measuring up. We're going to hold on to people. Yeah. We're going to have that draw. Yeah. I got to check, since you were an altar boy. Did you look forward to funerals?
No. I most of the time, as an altar boy, when I was an altar boy, everything was in Latin.
I see.
So we read off of cards and responded.
Yeah, I remember that too.
And we, most of what we said, I don't remember, and it was in Latin, and most most of the congregation didn't understand.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, that was typical. My father was bought a missile with the English on one side, and he was always proud of being able to kind of follow along. But no, I was just remembering that as an altar boy, you got pulled out of school for funerals.
Well,
and that was kind of that was it was. I mean, you were sad the person was dead, but on the other hand.
well, what happened was is that because it was a small town, I was pulled out for funerals, but the reason that I was pulled out for funerals was to play taps because I was the horn player in the band. And so that's what I did during the funerals was play taps. And as a small person, in a small town, when I came along, most of the Saturday mornings we would go to the theater and with our 15 cents and 10 cents to get in and 5 cents for the popcorn, and so I got away with getting into the theater for probably till I was in high school and beyond, till the theater owner said, "Didn't I see you in the band?" And it sort of blew my cover as far as a child, the under 10 fee, and that was the end of my my cheap theater experience.
Yeah, yeah. Gee. Now, for lots of people, especially if they've been raised in a reasonably sheltered way, that Vietnam stuff can be a real trauma. Was it for you?
It was. I went there. I was there for a year. Involved in, and at that particular time, the church experience was not my main reference. Mm-hmm. So that was my gap, mm-hmm. And so all of the alcohol and so forth, cigarettes. Everybody was smoking cigarettes and drinking alcohol. During the full year, I was there, and I was in the same situation. The only amazing part about that is that it is astounding to see how someone can be involved in those kinds of activities and go totally from an alcoholic stupor to a functioning soldier at the top of his performance, and how adrenaline and situations can move you from one extreme totally to the other extreme. And to see folks, wait a minute, I just saw this guy, he couldn't walk, and now he's throwing 90-pound ammunition around, is just an amazing feat. So it was amazing how people could oscillate between one extreme and the other extreme, and it seemed to be totally two different operations, two different worlds.
One of the long-standing kind of things the Bat explores is what happens to people's thinking as they go through the stuff they go through, and especially how one kind of begins to have the thoughts early on that turn into projects and ways of looking at things later on. Can you say a little bit about how your thinking developed over this the period that you were growing up? I mean, I suppose a lot of times at the beginning people kind of just get nudged into things and then nudged into other things by circumstance.
I think that what you call circumstance, theologically, I believe is providence. And that nudging is something that I believe has been a lifelong movement for me. And like the engineering, it wasn't like I chose that and this is what I picked and I knew I was going to be an engineer and all. I knew all of those kinds of things, but they weren't conscious choices that were actually made to the point where, all right, at 5 years old, I know I'm going to be an engineer, and this is the steps that I'm going to take to actually go through that. And it's very paramount because very few of our kids now know where they're going to be or where they want to be. And the community and people around them are not mentoring them in that vacuum to make up and point them into a direction that actually moves them from a point of undecisiveness to a point that they actually need to be, recognizing their skills and the opportunities and the other kinds of things that need to be done. When I first came here and first started working in the church as a young 20-year-old, most of the things that I did was out of ignorance, and the people around me were the ones that were really directing, and I might have had the position, but they were really the ones that were so on the sideline nurturing and molding and teaching me that I didn't know I was being taught. And by the time I figured out what was going on, I was there already. And that's the kind of community that was here in Minneapolis when I got here. It was a small community. It was a family community. It was the same, almost like a nurturing farm community that I had come from. And I was fortunate enough to walk into that arena and be a recipient of that. And I think that I've continuously been a recipient, even now, of people who have mentored and molded and helped, and that's what makes it so paramount in the service of others, is because there's so much that's actually going on in this providential care through other people that you happen to be a part of that too. And the community idea, the family idea, is a large paradigm for me.
So, well, I guess I'd be interested in hearing a little more about the kind of roles you took in the church over this time, the kind of things you did.
Well, my key is that when I first got here as a young professional, I came in as an engineer. I came in to a company that was a very community-oriented company, and the key was that I always thought that I was blessed to the point where I had many of the things that I needed taken care of. My finances were taken care of, my home was taken care of, a lot of my basic needs was actually taken care of. Work was taken care of. What that allowed me to do was that allowed me to give back to the community some of the time and some of the money and some of the energy that other people in the community were not able to do. They had to work during the day. I could take off during the day. They had 10 kids and I was able to have extra money. So a lot of things in the community, serving on the with the schools, serving with the police, serving with politics, serving in the church. I could do all those kinds of things because I was allowed to. Because I was both financially and time oriented to the point where I was allowed to do that. Right. And so that's how it started. It's because of the time that was allocated to me.
Yeah. So it was a lot of it was that your company was making it possible for you in some ways
to do
this work.
Yes.
Yeah. So, did you enjoy engineering? When you
I enjoyed engineering. Engineering was a I was in the leading edge of engineering. I was, in the 70s when they were just shipping up minorities here into engineering. So I was on the leading edge of that push. So a lot of things that actually happened, I was moving into the front where people hadn't been before, or very few people had been before. So I was active in recruiting, so I could work with, even as an engineer, I went on college trips and so forth with H&R as starting minority organizations. A lot of these things had not been done before. So it was a front end. Now, one of the things that happened for me in engineering was the fact that I started in engineering because I had come out at that point. I started on the bottom of engineering. And through the years worked myself from almost the janitor to the top of the engineering field. But I had started at the bottom and worked my way all the way up. In fact, when I came here and first took on the engineering job here, no one that I worked with had a degree. 3 bosses above me didn't have a degree. So I was in a field that was isolated. It wasn't until 3 or 4 years that I moved to another level that was even in the engineering realm, per se.
Yeah. And did you find that a humane process? I mean, the climbing that ladder, I mean, were you actually learning and getting better and feeling competent at each level? I mean, was it a good ladder?
It gives you a different kind of perspective when you move from that particular point. What it did do to a certain extent was it allowed me, it sort of tended to keep me in engineering, because those that had started in engineering, in the top of engineering, their ladder would have been maybe the middle or the top of mine, and moved from there into management and upper management in the companies. So by the time I'd gotten to where they had started with, my 20 years was over. But mine was a good, I had a good career. But it made me very proficient at my career.
Yeah, I'll bet.
I was a very good engineer, and at that particular point, when you're the only one, you can be the best.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, then, I guess I'm interested in hearing a little bit about the transition to high school math teaching. I mean, that's quite a shift.
Well, what happened was that the company left and moved to California. I decided I didn't want to go, so I started in the real estate business, and I was a terrible landlord. I lost all kinds of money. I was in situations that were dangerous 99% of the time, and my wife basically said, you just can't do this anymore. And in the process of doing that, I decided, well, I'll teach in the school because I can teach from 9 o'clock to 2 o'clock, and I'll still have time to do my business. I'd have a basic income and work on the real estate. And then then the scenario went, well, as long as I'm here in school from 9 o'clock to 2 o'clock, I might as well go to school and get a degree and licensed in this deal. So I went to school, and so it sort of moved closer and closer and closer till at the point now I've been doing it for a while.
So what's it like to be a math teacher at North High? these days?
The math department at North is at a point where it's got people that are the best at what they do. There's no parallel with the group that we actually have. The largest deterrent in the city, in our field, in math, is the fact that at North, the system is more constraining than any other factor. And so the teachers are untouchable as far as their excellence are concerned. The students can move, even though they're low coming in. They can make movement if, in fact, the teachers at North are allowed to let them move. And for the last 4 years, we've been able to do that. And more with the No Child Left Behind and some of the other criteria that's coming in, federal, state, district criteria has come in and changed some of that so that we've been restricted in what we can do. And it's not been to the best of the case.
What kinds of system factors or restrictions or whatever make a difference to your ability to teach math? How does that play out?
I think how it plays out is the fact that when the system tells me that there is no child left behind and that all children are the same and everyone is going to do Algebra 2, and I've got a child who is special ed, who is struggling with adding and subtracting, it just doesn't make sense. I mean, it doesn't take a mathematician to understand that there's no way that I'm going to get this child who's struggling with adding and subtracting through an Algebra 2 curriculum. And to say that he's going to be left behind is not a legitimate context for him. What we should be saying is, I'm going to make this child the best that they can be and move them from whatever position that they are as far as they can be moved in the 4 years that I actually have them. And to make me give them an Algebra 2 class that they can neither understand nor relate to or do, and then fail them because they're supposed to be in an Algebra 2 class is not advantageous to the child's growth. It just does not. And that's a systematic problem. Mm-hmm. And so the things that we could do, the provisions that the kids actually need to account for all of the issues that relate at North, restrict it when you put systems that work someplace else or that relate to someplace else into that environment.
So what have you learned about math teaching to this audience? What do you know about how to do it well?
The key is that it's not necessarily the material, it's not necessarily the curriculum, it's the teacher. You can take a good teacher that is working in that teacher's mode. It may be different than another teacher's mode, but in that teacher's mode. If that teacher likes working with photography, that teacher can teach more math through photography than any textbook on algebra could teach you through that particular mode, because that's their interest, that's their passion. They'll fire up the students on that particular passion. They'll relate the information to that, and they will educate all those around those because of that aura that they have in that particular arena. But you take photography to another person, who doesn't do photography and make them teach the same class because it works for the other teacher, and it just is not going to happen. So the key is that you have to match the teacher, the mode of the teacher, and the way that teacher functions to an arena where that teacher can perform the educational task. Mm-hmm. And administratively, what has happened because of transiency and movement and standardizations, what has happened in essence is, well, we want to make everybody teach with photography. Mm-hmm. So that when they move over here, they're at the same place, they're not lost, they've got the same information, and what that happens is that that has advantages, but it has drastic disadvantages. And so you've got to trade between those two.
How serious is this matter of transiency? What percentage, do you happen to know what percentage of the folks who start at North at the beginning of the year are there at the end? I no reason you should.
No,
it's just
it's a large factor.
It's a large, yeah.
It's a large factor.
Yeah.
There's a lot of movement.
Yeah. That's always puzzled me how you could teach with that.
Well, you know, you're in chapter 4 and you got 3 or 4 students that just come in today that are in chapter 2, or 3 or 4 kids that are coming in chapter 6. It makes for a very that's why they want to make the cookie sheet of everybody teaching photography, so they can get around that. But like I said, it's got advantages and it's got disadvantages, and so the key is that addressing the problem is not the teaching problem. Addressing the problem is the transiency problem. And what we want to do is we want to address the transiency problem with an educational solution. And when we do that, the education suffers.
Yeah. In one of my days when I was willing to get lynched, I used to propose that they tear down four of the 5 poorest schools in St. Paul, build one great big beehive. I said, any disadvantages you'll have will be overcome by the advantage that the kids will stay in one place. That is, before that, they were moving among 5 schools, and it just seemed impossible. So the picture I'm getting is that you've got really competent teachers, and things in the system that are outside of your control or outside of your responsibility are making it very hard to do your job.
Correct.
Okay.
And the key is that the easiest solution is to say, well, what we'll do is we'll take your kids and we'll move them into a functioning system that's putting out top-notch students. The problem with that is that our kids are high-cost kids. We've got a social worker, we've got a special ed, we got a community worker, we got a teacher, we got age. We have high-cost students. Number one is that you couldn't give them a voucher because no profit-oriented school would take these kids because they're too high cost. Other than the fact that they're high cost and they need lots of support, family support, community support, transportation support, all the other kinds of supports that many of these other schools have outside of the educational system. The bottom line is that as much as they talk about us, we are very good at what we do. And the key is that when these students move to other schools, they do not know how to deal with them. And when they put them in the other arenas, they're not succeeding. And as they're moving to the outside suburbs and going to these other schools are not having the success that you think they are with the students that are coming from our location.
Yeah. I always said when I sent my kids to private schools that the reason they were going to private school primarily was that the schools could discriminate, which meant, in the case of a decent private school, they took on no more problems than it could handle. And as soon as it had 3 people who were high cost, no more high cost kids.
And they handpicked those.
Yeah, and they handpicked them. Yeah, and they were pretty brave because they were taking on serious risks and managing them. But they knew they couldn't have more than 3 with their resources. They couldn't have more than 3 or 4 kids who are going to be outrageously demanding of all sorts of things in the classroom at a time.
And when you have 27 high-cost students and 3 that are not, you can't afford that.
Yeah.
You can't afford that. And the key is that the school is no longer allowed to be able to fix the percentages where that classroom is manageable. And so what happens is that you can't get the private school environment in the public schools because of the percentage. But the public school has a student population as numerous and as talented as the private schools. But they're intermixed with other contingencies that will not allow them to succeed as the private school. And the federal government, so you have an open door policy.
Mm-hmm.
And when you have an open door policy and you have, quote, a college prep program, and anybody can enter into a college prep program, that you have no criteria for either academically, socially, or support-wise, what happens is that you end up with that spread of talent between 3rd grade and 11th grade in the college prep program, and no teacher or educator will be able to deal with that, can deal with that kind of spread. You just can't. I mean, teaching-wise, you can't deal with a spread like that. And if you've got that spread and you're not allowed to manage that spread, then you've got a factor for defeat.
Well, I know outside of the range of this camera, we've had some conversations when you've been coming home with a briefcase full of papers to grade all weekend and such. I mean, I know how frustrating that gets. What keeps you in it? I mean, it sounds as if the whole game is rigged against you, and it's getting more rigged against you with things like No Child Left Behind, and the cries for vouchers, and the kind of contempt that some people have heaped upon schools that are in many respects doing as good a job as they can under the constraints they're living with. What keeps you there?
There are even amongst all of the social factors, the fact is the kids are still there, and I think maybe one of the things that best explained is a story. All right. I had this young lady who would come into my class the first thing every morning. For the first 2 or 3 minutes, she would address me with a litany of things that normally people wouldn't say about other people. Short, bald head, she would go through the whole thing. And she would she would close this litany with, I have to smoke a joint before I come to school every day just so I can make it in your class. Well, about 2 years later, this young lady came to me. She had lipstick on, she was all dressed up. She came to me and she said, Mr. Kemp, I would like you to help me with my GED. So, well, you know, number one is they've got all kinds of programs in the city to do GED. In fact, I teach one, so I know there's one right across the parking lot. They teach GED. Her response is that, no, I want you to teach me. And I was the only one that, even with all of the arguing and fussing and fighting, that, you know, she thought that was concerned about her. And my response to her was, well, I tell you what, anytime you want to, you come in here, sit back here in the corner of the room, and do your math. And as I get done with the rest of the class, I'll check on you, and we'll move through this, and I'll help you with your GED. She came in for almost a year, sat back in there in the corner of the room, did her work, I helped her along, and she got her GED. She's moved on, and she's doing very, very well right now. Those are the kinds of kids that we can help outside of the system. But it's outside of the system. Theoretically, she couldn't be there. Theoretically, she couldn't be in the class. You know, all of the system criteria said that she could not do that. And for those who use the system as a total restraint, they will not be able to succeed in it.
So your successes have been at the edges of, or outside of, or around the system?
Around the edges.
Around the edges of the
Around
system.
the edges.
Yeah. And you've had enough success that keeps you in?
Right. Yeah, and we've had, you know, and we can, because many of the students, and in that particular case, I was in an alternative school, but in that particular setting, all of these students have failed in the system. Mm-hmm. So to put a system criteria back on them when the reason that they're here is because they failed outside the system, within the system, it's not a reasonable criteria to keep following. Once you know that, hey, this is the reason that you're here is because you got put out of the public school and couldn't operate in the system. Mm-hmm. So to duplicate it would be formula for defeat.
Mm-hmm. Now, I'm wondering, I mean, in some ways, I guess from the outside, thinking about high school without, you know, a lot of recent experience, I think that a math teacher would have a particularly hard job. I mean, it's harder to make math exciting in a certain way than history or literature, things like that. Can you get people excited about math? Are contemporary kids?
I think what is exciting about math, or exciting about anything, is success. And the key is that it's not what you do. It's when you can show someone that they can do it, then that's what makes it exciting. Because they failed at it so many times, or they failed at other things so many times. To show them a success in a particular arena generates excitement. Mm-hmm. And so the key is that if you can take your skills and you can use those skills to conquer some task with a student, and that student succeeds, then interest follows.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, I think of my dad, who was a 6th grade teacher, pretty serious guy. He was also an introvert, as I learn now, trying to understand him now some years after he died. But he would put a lot of energy into the classroom. And it was really, it took a lot of energy, and he bring stuff over to grade. But he then had 25 miles between the school and where he lived, because he didn't want people to be commenting about it, okay? Came home, and he was a different guy. He had, you know, his little truck farm, and he liked to read, and it was like, you know, I do this job here, and then I've got another life. And I guess I'm wondering, I mean, I'm thinking that the math teacher role, if you know, taking it seriously, as I'm sure you do, could get to be almost all-consuming, and yet you've done this ministry thing just recently, this Doctor of Divinity. How does that work? Do you have two lives also, or how?
It may be the farm.
What?
It may be the farm.
Really?
Yeah. It may be, for me, it might be the farm.
I see.
And the key is that it's a different arena of service that is still service, but it allows you to change your focus to the point where it's not quite as stressful as the other arena is. So I think it does. You can have your rewards, you can have your input, you can have many other kinds and they're not quite as draining as the other arena is.
I see.
So it very much may be the fact that that's the farm for me.
I see. Tell me a little bit about your doctoral work and the projects that you're working on now with respect to ministry.
Well, like I said, most of my career since I've gotten here, I've got involved in the church. One of the first positions that I took on was as a Sunday school superintendent. And having an engineering degree, it wasn't totally transparent into the ministry. So as a Sunday school superintendent, I started studying. And so I went to school at the seminary just to become more cognizant of what I was actually doing as a volunteer. About 10 years after I had done this, the registrar of the school called me and she said, "You came when I came to this school, and my charge before I leave is going to be to get you out of here." And she said, "The first thing you need to do is apply to the school, because you've never applied. You've been going here for 10 years. You've taken all of the courses, but you've never applied, and you've been here as a special student, something that was intended to be done for one semester till all your paperwork got here. You never changed, and we just kept on, and you just kept on taking classes." So the year that I graduated with my master's, she said, "You need to take the orientation, you need to do the weekend seminar for the new freshmen that are coming, you know, the new seminarians. You need to do your a paper. You've got about 4 things that you need to do in the next 6 months here so we can get you out of here." And so she actually called me at home and said, "You know, you need to be at the new student orientation tomorrow, Saturday morning at 8 o'clock. And she actually called my house and did it for me.
Talk about mentoring. You've lucked out.
So she said, "Well, you know, one of the things that we need to do is for this thesis thing that you have to do, you need to get together with your counselor and get this started." And so she asked me, "Well, who is your counselor?" And so when I told her who my counselor is, she said, "Well, you know, the guy hasn't been here for 5 years, And I don't think that's probably going to work right now. So we had to do all of it. So, that idea of mentoring, that idea of providence, that's an example. My contention all along was, I have a job. I'm an engineer. I make good money. I have no intention of going to school and becoming a minister. I'm going here because it makes me proficient at what I'm doing as a volunteer, and I never intended to graduate. I just accidentally graduated because I was there so long.
Yeah, tried 26 years. That was my story.
Yeah, and it's the same thing. Yeah,
and it was very much the same thing. Somebody called and said, why don't we see if we can get you finished up?
Yeah, finished up with this. And so another example, people would come into my life and said, hey, we need to clean up this mess a little bit here, and focus you, and do this. So it's not far off for me to be that kind of mentor for the students in a situation that I'm at right now. And is mentoring easy? Is she took her own time, she took her own attention to do that. Does it require something of you to do those kinds of things, to mentor people, to move them? Yes. But that's part of what mentoring is. It does cost. If it doesn't cost, then it's not worth much.
Gee. Well, now I guess we have just a few minutes left, but I wanted to just ask what the farm's going to look like. I mean, we talked a little bit last night about what kind of direction your work in ministry might take. Can you say just a little bit about what you're thinking about for the next while?
Well, the key is that in the context of life cycles, right? And we go through some of this stuff in school. People have different phases in life that they do different things. At the phase of life that I am at right now, I'm not at the point where I'm starting programs, or I'm directing programs, or I'm moving, I'm a pastor in a church. At this particular point, with my experience in the church for the last 40 years and all the things that I've actually done, my answer during my counsel was the fact that I don't intend to be a minister. I plan on making them. And so at this particular point, what I want to do is support other young people in becoming superintendents, becoming pastors, and becoming church leaders, and doing the things that I had done in the last 40 years, so that they can make that transition and make those processes easier. The focus that I had intended on was an arena where those services could be used for individuals who couldn't normally afford or get them in another context. Small churches, churches with ministers who had not been to school and needed some help. And the key is that I'm starting this, or I will be starting this arena again at a point where financially I can do this kind of help to churches and to people who couldn't afford to get this help in another kind of arena. Because as expensive as the counseling and business management and so forth actually is, they wouldn't be able to afford this unless it was someone who was actually doing this as a service.
So your idea is to work with ministers and churches to help fill in the gaps in their skills, especially in directions like business management and so forth, where they need to know things they don't know
That they haven't
in order to.
They haven't went to school, they didn't have the time, And the key is, we were discussing the idea is that in ministers have such a variety of tasks that they're responsible for. They got to do family counseling, and they've got to do administration, and they've got to do preaching, and they've got to have people skills. There's no person that has that's an expert in all the areas or arenas that they're charged to function in. The only way that they can be proficient or conquer some of these areas is to fill in the gaps of those other areas that they're not the best in with someone else that can help them in those particular arenas. And you can't afford to do that with at a high cost without somebody helping.
Well, thank you for your time. Appreciate hearing your story. It's been, this is a house. I mean, how many stories are there on this street?
Yes.
But at least I get one. Thanks lots.